Hello, I'm Pisana Ferrari and I come from Italy. My connection to the PH community dates back many years ago. I was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary hypertension in 1988. And at the time, there was nothing happening in the field of PH. There were no drugs, no PH centers, no guidelines. So it was very difficult being a patient in those days. And not only were there no drugs, but there was really nothing happening at all, not even any internet. And I was lucky enough to be reasonably well for a number of years. And it's not until 12 years after my diagnosis that I was first put on a treatment. And it was I was on a study, actually. But I was quite late stage disease by then. So I was listed for a double lung transplant. The transplant was performed in 2002. And in fact, tomorrow I'm celebrating my 15th anniversary for my transplant. PH has occupied 30 years of my life, half of my life. I think research is really important for patients, and they should seriously consider when they're offered this possibility. In some countries or in some situations, this may be the only way to have drugs. In my particular case, in 1988, there was nothing else. So being put on a trial gave me the opportunity to try a drug before it was put on the market, gaining at least 1 or 2 years. My pulmonary hypertension obviously progressed with time. Perhaps I was put on the trials a bit late, but not late in absolute terms, but in terms of how severe my condition was by then. So I arrived at the transplant very weak, very thin, and in a very advanced stage of the disease. And that, of course, made matters worse in the sense that time to recover was difficult, and I had a lot of complications post-transplant. I was very lucky to make it through the transplant and recover relatively quickly. It took me about 3 months to get back on my feet. And then over the next couple of months, I was completely fine. And in fact, now it's been 15 years and I lead a completely normal life. I have a full-time job, family, and all sorts of activities. I started getting involved in the PH community actually in 2001. When together with some other patients in my own country, in Italy, we founded a small patient group, which has since become quite large and very active. And 2 years later, I was invited to the very first meeting of a few associations from around Europe that got together with the idea just of meeting. But then this meeting was so successful, it was in Vienna in 2003 during one of the big congresses, that we decided that to create an umbrella organization. And at that time, there were only 8 countries involved. But over the years, we created a structure, we became more organized, and it's become a very large group. We now have 39 member associations from 33 countries. So we've come a very long way. After my transplant, I decided to have an active role in PHA Europe. And since 2010, I'm actually working full time. PHA Europe has grown steadily over the past few years with new countries joining every year, 2 or 3. And we have set up, PHA Europe has set up programs to help patients or caregivers in countries to set up an association. So we have a program called White Spots. And the White Spots are the countries in Europe with no patient association. So through this program, we've helped many set up and start their activities. And we provided guidance and funds for websites, registration, legal fees, and so on. And of course, one of our biggest problem was as the group grew that there were so many languages that it was very difficult to communicate. You can imagine it's about 30 languages because some countries share a language. So we set up another program called the Fellowship Program, whereby PHA Europe pays for a part-time English-speaking assistant for the associations where there are really some big communication issues. For our members to be able to involve in the work, communication is vital. You can't communicate if I write an email in English and the person at the other end has to find somebody to translate it into Hungarian or whatever, then has to reply and translate the reply and so on. So this program has helped enormously. We now have a very smooth flow of information. We have 23 fellows. So 23 countries have this opportunity, and that's helped enormously. So these 2 programs, White Spots and Fellowship, have been set up really to help our members start up and grow and then become active in their own countries with the patients. We are not in direct contact with the patients. We are more involved in global initiatives, global awareness campaigns like World PH Day, and advocacy activities on organ donation and transplant with European institutions. We're involved in discussions on pricing, health technology assessment, and rare disease policies in some of the big public health organizations in Brussels, and also in the professional societies, and also in the EMA, for example, and so also with regulatory. The really big challenge for PHA Europe is that there are huge inequalities across Europe in access to drugs and surgery. So we have some countries where all the drugs are available. There are countries where one or two are available. And there are unfortunately even countries where no drugs are available and no surgery. So this is our really major challenge. And that's why we're involved in a lot of advocacy. So not only are we doing advocacy in Brussels, let's say, with the institutions and other bodies or within larger organizations, but we're also supporting national advocacy activities. So by taking part in meetings and supporting with letters to ministers or health authorities, whatever the case may be. Of course, it's very different from one country to the other. The other big problem is that not all of our members are members of the EU. And in the countries which are not part of the EU, the situation is even worse. I'm thinking of countries like Bosnia or Ukraine. People there are really helpless. There's also countries where there are huge financial problems, for example, Greece. So it's not a homogeneous population, and there's a lot of different situations, and that's the challenge. Transplant is another big issue. There are countries where there's no transplant. So they either are part of some exchange programs that, for example, Vienna has with Eastern Europe. They have agreements whereby the countries provide the organs and Vienna accepts to perform surgery on the nationals from that country. There are countries in Europe that don't do transplants. They don't have a national program for lung transplant, for example, which is one of the most complex. So in that case, they either manage to go abroad or there's no other option for them. With the drugs, survival has improved a lot and quality of life, but when you're at end-stage disease, the only option really is transplant. And it's not only a question of financial, but also of competences. You know, there may not be the necessary competences in a country, people that are actually able to do it, to perform it. So it's also a problem of education of doctors. It's financial. It depends on the national health policy. There's a lot of different variables. For many, many years, I had no drugs and there were no centers. That I felt very, very isolated. And that's one of the big problems with pulmonary hypertension. At the time, it was worse, of course, because I didn't meet any real patients until many, many years after my diagnosis. But the isolation is a very real problem, not only for that reason, but because the disease is very little known and not visible. So sometimes even your closest family members or your friends don't really understand how severe the disease is. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to join or be supported by a patient association where you can meet other people with your same problems, share and learn from each other, and get the kind of support that you may not be able to get from your doctor, because that's not really the role of doctors and they don't have the time, or from your family members. And like, for example, easy to understand information and resources on different aspects of the disease. Also, the needs of patients will vary according to the time from diagnosis. The information they will need at the time of diagnosis will be different from that when they're in a more advanced stage of the disease, when they're being listed for transplant or for other surgery. So I think that's an important aspect of the role of patient associations. One of the greatest achievements that we've had over the past few years has been the World Pulmonary Hypertension Day. This was launched in 2012, and it was a bit of a gamble by the Spanish Association. And we didn't know whether other associations around the world would join this movement. But what's been incredible is that over the years, associations from all over the world have embraced it and are conducting World PH Day events in their own countries. Last year, and it's not just Europe, last year there were 30 in Europe alone and another 17 around the world. So I think this started as a very small initiative in Spain, and it's grown to a movement which has produced a lot of it's gained a lot of media attention, and it's contributed also to the feeling of being part of an international community. I think when you have joint initiatives that are this big across continents, across countries, that creates a sense of belonging and of community. And of course, it also reinforces our message. We have a stronger voice. When we started out with World Pulmonary Hypertension Day and we had to choose a theme, and I'm talking about Europe now, we thought that sports is something that has a very broad, very universal appeal. And we felt that the idea of people involved in high energy activities, running or racing in solidarity with the patients who are faced with very big physical limitations and who can't, was a good way to raise awareness about the disease. So that's how the slogan "Get Breathless for PH" was launched, with the idea that people would race for those who can't. So it was also a show of solidarity. And it worked very well the first year. So since then, we've kept it. Many of you may have seen the logo with the two blue lungs. And inside the lungs, there are different sports being played. So it's linked to the sports theme. And we're going to use this same theme this year. I have to say that there are other countries around the world using different ideas. And of course, that's also great. But I'm very happy. I was happy to see that countries around the world did also pick up on our Blue Lungs T-shirts, which is nice, and on the colors, which are usually blue or mauve. Our member associations are extremely active at national level, and they've accomplished quite a lot in many different ways. And this is even for small associations in small countries. It takes maybe one good event where you connect with a celebrity or a health authority, and you can gain an incredible amount of awareness. You can create a lot of awareness. So I think there's no limitations. It's not only the big associations that do a lot. It's also the small ones. And it's really up to the individuals that are involved to come up with something that's creative, interesting, and that can catch attention. So I'm really happy to see that we have a mix of big and smaller ones, and some are more recent, some have been established for a long time. They're being run by very dynamic, very motivated, passionate, and dedicated people who are really doing their best in their own countries to help the patients, and who are also very happy to work within the European PH community to do things together. So it's very rewarding for me, being kind of the European coordinator, to see how enthusiastic they are and how well everything is going. If we think in terms of successes, I think you have to think that success can mean a very different thing in a country like Bosnia. In Bosnia, it could be simply having one drug would be very successful. In other countries which are more fortunate and privileged, a success might be achieving that psychosocial support is reimbursed, or, it really depends on the countries. Success is very relative. It's relative to the situation of the association, of the patients, of the economics, and political as well. There's no one success. But I think for any organization, success is very much linked to how you can manage to create a sense of community. I think that is a very good indicator of success. When people like working together, they participate actively. Now, I can say this about the association in Italy, which I co-founded with other patients. It's touching to see how people, when they come to our meeting, they say that they're coming to the family meeting, and they're all hugging each other and kissing and crying and sharing and this sort of thing. That's what I think is one of the main ingredients of success. And if you're a tightly knit group and you share values and objectives and so on, you can be more successful in other things as well. I think it adds to what you can achieve. My name is Pisana Ferrari, and I'm aware that I'm rare.